Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's parent chat. We really appreciate you being here tonight. We are obviously talking about screen time tonight, but we wanted to first start just by acknowledging the tragedy that happened in Texas, which happens to be my home state. And I lived pretty close to Uvalde, Texas, growing up. And our hearts are heavy and we're very sad about what has happened. It's senseless. And I know that a lot of us are really trying to process it and understand. And so I just wanted to, I felt like we couldn't start tonight without acknowledging that. So our hearts go out to all of the families as they are figuring out how to move forward from this. So, so yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. There's no easy solutions, and hopefully we as a community can help in some way. We have decided we are going to do a parent chat next week that is going to focus on how do we support our kids through this. So be looking for details on that. Those details will be released as we get that put together.
Sure. There's one thing I want to jump in and add, and that is that the Child Mind Institute put out some really helpful resources around how to talk to your kids in times of tragedy like this. And so I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. And so you can take a look at that as well.
That's a great resource. I was reading through those resources and they're really great. Elena, you're asking, is there a translation for this webinar in Spanish? This is something that we are working on to try to have parent chats in Spanish. We don't have those yet. I know we had a couple of translators at some point. Bonnie, can you speak to this? Because I know it's something we have definitely considered.
Yeah, we've considered it. We've tried it, and we had actually someone to do it live, and there wasn't anybody who took advantage of that. So then we weren't offering it on an ongoing basis. But it's really great to know that there is interest in that, and we can keep working on that.
Yes, so just know that we are considering that and how to make parent chats more diverse. So thank you for asking that. That does help us to know.
Sheri, I do want to ask though, there is an interpretation button. I'm just kind of on the spot here looking at that on the bottom of the screen, and it does. Oh, that it looks like you can have an interpreter.
Oh, okay.
I thought that might be some sort of automated translation, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I've looked in that, and I know that I think with Google Slides or PowerPoint, there's one where you can have an automatic translation. So we'll keep looking at that. We will figure this out. Maybe for next year we can have these things figured out. But thanks for asking that question for sure. Okay, can everybody see my screen? If you can just put a thumbs up or a yes or something, just to make sure that this is sharing correctly. I've had some weird tech issues going on today, so I want to make sure that is coming through so you can see it. So I wanted to start out, screen time is something that I know that parents really get frustrated with this, of how to deal with it, how to keep their kids safe, how to monitor the time and all of that stuff. So one of the things that I really want to do is to have questions tonight. Disclaimer, I was diagnosed with COVID yesterday, so I am having a tough time with my voice and perseverance and such. So I really do want to, it'll give me some breaks. If you ask more questions, Bonnie's going to step in and be reading the chat box for us. So feel free to ask questions. The best way to do it that will keep the questions tidy for us is using the Q&A box, because if you put questions in a chat box, they can easily get lost because as you chat, it kind of scrolls up. So if you look, put your mouse, hover it around the top or bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A option there. So it doesn't matter when you think of those questions, it doesn't interrupt us at all. So if I'm talking, go ahead and throw that question in there and we'll get back to it. When I like this, Bonnie, we'll have to keep this in mind. Translating the script after it's published, that would be a good option too. And Teams has translation. That's the one. I knew there was one that had translation. Okay, great. Okay, so every generation has something that the previous generations despise. It's seen as like, this is going to be the downfall of society. This is something that is horrible for everybody. And what's funny is if you go way back in history, there's always a gripe about this. Socrates was against kids learning to write. He thought that if kids learned to write, that it would diminish their capability to memorize and to remember facts and information. Then we fast forward quite a bit when books came out. Parents weren't happy about books because their kids were now reading books rather than going outside and exercising and playing and working, right? And then fast forward today is kind of screen time. This is really what we're dealing with as parents. This is something that's new, right? To have screens so embedded in everyday life. And so we have screens and we have to deal with this, right? I thought that was really funny about Socrates when I heard that. So screens, the thing about them is they're unavoidable. I know that there are some parents who say, well, I'm not going to get my kids a phone until 8th grade. And that's fine. That's one type of screen. But our kids start using screens at such a young age now. I know a lot of 1-year-old, 2-year-olds know how to swipe and to manipulate a screen. There's iPads, there's tablets, there's TVs, there's all sorts of screens. So it's not just, am I getting them a phone or not? There's so many other ways that our kids access screens, and we access them as well, right? Now, one of the things I want us to consider is, what do we use screens for? And what do our kids use screens for? So if you can put that in the chat box. And the reason I want to do this is I want to think of screen time in this holistic point of view, right? And I don't want to think of it all as negative. To get our kids to collaborate with us on screen time and setting expectations and stuff, we really have to think about the whole picture here. So let's put some things in the chat box there. And Bonnie, I'm going to have you read those for me because I will need to be taking breaks as we go.
Yeah, happy to do that. So there's some things coming in already. Games and videos. One person says use it for work, to connect with others, to learn. Games with others. Yeah, those are a few. Reading, entertainment, work, learning. Shopping is one. Video chats with friends. Yeah, there's almost anything you can do. There's a version of it online.
Absolutely. I love shopping. That's one I forgot to put on my list. I mean, we do so much shopping online now, right? Especially with the pandemic, we kind of got sucked into shopping online. Kind of a pastime for some of us.
Yeah, checking the news, staying informed. Photos, shopping, yeah. Researching homework, yep.
Yeah, there's a lot. So it's not just endless scrolling. Some of it is, but there's a lot of things that we're doing. Watching TV, movies, getting support, you know, coming from the mental health field. That's one area that I love, that being online and connected that way can give us and our kids extra support that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. So the thing really that we need to remember is that screens are here to stay, maybe until the next generation where they have chips implanted in their heads. Who knows what's coming up next, right? But this right now is what we have to do. We have to figure out as parents with kids coming up in this generation, and we have to figure out how to deal with it and how to, even more importantly, teach our kids how to deal with it and how to regulate it on their own, because we don't get to just regulate and control everything they do, right? So we know that there's a lot of downsides to screen time. We hear a lot about the downsides. So I just put a short list here together, and I want, again, to get your opinions of what you think of when you think of screen time in a negative way. What's the downside? Some of the things that I've listed here is that it's 24/7. There's no reprieve from it. So especially when our kids get onto social media, even if we have them putting their phones away at night at 9 o'clock, there's actually a lot of social stuff that goes on between 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. So when they get up in the morning and they get onto their devices, there's all of this social stuff that's continued to go on. The other piece about that is that when we were growing up, we would have maybe a bad day at school, and then we'd go home. We'd have that reprieve from all the social interactions, and we don't have that anymore. Also, of course, one of our things that we're worried about is predators, that our kids being online, they have access to all of these other people that we don't get to monitor. And this happens for even our young kids when they're on doing things like Roblox and Minecraft. There's the chat rooms. So that obviously is a downside, that it's hard for us to monitor all of those interactions. Cyberbullying and trolls, this is a big thing. Even if it's not cyberbullying, it can just take our kids, if they are online, they post a photo and someone posts a mean comment about it or a snarky comment. It might not be cyberbullying, it might be a one-time thing, but it still can reduce our kids' self-esteem. There's a lot of effects on mental health, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. What we tend to see in the media is all of the really negative effects on their mental health, but there are some positive effects as well. But here we're talking about the downsides on their self-esteem and anxiety and things of that sort.
Can I make a comment there too, Sheri? And that's the way in which using screens crowds out other things that are really developmentally beneficial for kids, the social interaction, the getting outside and playing. And so there is that side of it too.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in more detail. And then, yeah, seeing info they shouldn't. Of course, we have monitors and all these things, but we can't ensure that they don't see things that they shouldn't be seeing. And then the other thing that's interesting is that people don't usually consider is that it's normal for people to compare themselves to their peers, especially when they hit like middle school, their brain's developing, so they begin to see how they relate to the world around them, how they compare to others. So in previous life, prior to social media and screens, our kids were comparing themselves to the people like in their classrooms, in their schools. But now they're comparing themselves to people worldwide. And they're comparing themselves to people who are perfectly manicured for their Instagram and TikTok posts and all of that. So that really ups the game as far as them comparing themselves to others. Now, I think it's really important when we are trying to engage our kids in a conversation about screen time that we do consider the upside, because there are some good things about being connected online. One of them is connection. You know, somebody mentioned that they use technology to talk to family members abroad. Think about in the pandemic where we weren't able to travel and see family, that allowed us to stay connected. It also allows us to connect to people that we would never meet otherwise. And this is scary as a parent, but it's also a positive because our kids can interact with people that maybe they feel like they have something in common with. Maybe in their homeschool, they don't have people they connect to, but by being online, they can connect to more people and feel like they belong. They do have access to information, which is good and bad, that they have access to information on mental health, for instance. Of course, I am happy about that. They have access about, if they're interested in journalism, they can go online and read about that. They can connect to master classes from people who are experts in their field. And then there's communities that are created. If we think about parent chat and we think about Lake Washington School District, but this is amazing that we're able to connect as parents talking about mental health, talking about screen time. Whereas before we'd have to, you know, have a venue and say you need to show up, the childcare, whatever, to come and talk to us. And now here we are, we're talking to each other in the comfort of our home. I've got COVID, I can still do this presentation. I wouldn't be able to do this if I was sick and in person, of course. So it allows us some freedoms. And then the support. This is a piece that I think is so key. And I think that in the next few years, we're going to begin to utilize technology in a way that does give us more support for our kids, for ourselves, so that we're able to tap into the communities, the worldwide communities, when we're talking about difficult issues, ones that maybe we don't have support locally, or, you know, just it's great to have a bigger community when we're talking about things. So we can't forget about the good, positive things about screen time.
There's some comments here too that are coming in that are focusing on the upside. Melissa says that our whole family plays games together. It builds connections from their worldview. And then there's another comment that says screens for healthcare, telehealth, which is huge. People can actually interact with doctors and other types of professionals that they wouldn't be able to access otherwise.
Yeah, that's great. It makes me think of the new doctor that I'm using. It's this new service called Forward, and they have an in-person doctor in Bellevue Square, but then there's also an app on my phone. So 2 a.m. in the morning, like, hey, I'm not feeling too good, and I can type this text in my thing and I get an immediate response from a doctor. I know there's some mental health apps like that as well. And that's just amazing to be able to have that immediate contact. It's great. And I like this idea that it builds connection from their worldview. Yeah, to be able to see that we're not just this one little town here in the US, that there's other people out there with different experiences in this world. Yeah. Okay, there was another one up here I wanted to look at.
There were a couple that were on the downside,
Mhm.
which was dopamine hits and instant gratification, which is definitely a thing. Inappropriate material, yeah, it's too easy. And then causes anxiety, uses it as a manipulating tool of routine by parent who pays the bill.
Yeah, Trisha, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one that we need to think of. And I'm on some really large parenting groups for like 100,000 parents. And some of them are constantly saying if their kid's getting in trouble or struggling, the parents will say, just take away the phone, you own it, just take it away. And, so I think that's what you're talking about, is using this as kind of dangling it in front of your kids as something, because we pay the bills, we do pay the bills. Yeah, okay. This is Trisha. Let's put that one in the Q&A box. We'll make sure we get that one about when you're having two different households and the rules on that.
There's another one about how long is okay, and I think you might be getting to that to talk about those limits.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So make sure to put those questions in the Q&A, because we will make sure we come back to those. Okay. We'll lose them if they're in the chat box here. But to answer Danita, this will be available to listen to afterwards later. We're recording, right, Bonnie? Just to make sure.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about what do we do as parents? How do we handle all this? Because screens are here to stay. Our kids need screens for lots of different things. They use screens for things they want to do. So what do we do? I think one of the things when we're talking to our kids and starting these conversations is we have to avoid coming at it just from a negative point of view. And that's why I wanted us to talk about the downsides and the upsides, so that we don't forget that screens can be our friends. They're just often for us as parents frustrating, because it's more about the time, right? How much time are our kids online? So the first thing to think about is when our kids are younger, we want to do more monitoring. We want to be alongside them for the ride. We want to give them fewer screens to choose from, because that allows us to monitor better. And as they get older, we begin to loosen the reins and give them more and more freedom when it comes to what they're doing on screen time. Our goal is by the time they leave, whether they're going to college or they're just leaving the household around 18 or so, is they should be able to monitor themselves. So one of the things that I see some parents do is they really restrict how much their kids can use up until they're graduating from high school. And then when they go off on their own, the kids have no idea how to monitor and guide themselves. So we have to remember our long-term goal is for our kids to understand social media safety, screen time safety, and understand the balance, the importance of balance on being on a screen versus having real life interactions with people, right? So we also have to consider from the beginning of their screen time use, which for them is 2 these days, is we have to have rules and expectations as we go. And a lot of times what happens in today's environment, because screens are so pervasive in life, is we forget to have those conversations, because our kids have had them since they're 2. So at what time do you sit and have a logical conversation about things, right? So even at 2, it needs to be instilled in your kids that you have to ask mommy or daddy if you can use the screen. As they get older, then it becomes a conversation also about the internet and what they're allowed to go on to search. And then it becomes a conversation about social media and what is the etiquette on social media, what you're allowing. So it's a constant stream of conversations as your kids get older of collaborating on these expectations and rules. what often happens that I see is that there are no rules established until our kids get to middle school. And then it's like an oh crap moment of, wow, they now are more aware of what's out there, and now they're searching actively for things. So it's no longer an accident to find these things. So we have to have those conversations. And if we think of it in terms of we need to control everything, your anxiety is going to be really high, because there's no way to completely control your kids' online experience or their screens. So we have to learn how to, or we have to teach our kids how to be able to understand safety online, safety in screens. So that if they get, let's say they're playing Roblox and a stranger asks them to come into the chat room with them, that just like in real life, we need to teach them the rules around that. We have to teach them about what information do you put online? What pictures do you put online? There was somebody, I think she does a lot of talks in our district in the past, she has, and she talks to kids in terms of don't put anything online at all. And what happens is the kids kind of disconnect from that, because they do post pictures of themselves. So we have to be realistic and say, okay, if you post pictures of yourselves, make sure that you're not putting in information that says, you know, what school you're going to, if you can help it, or address, or your parents' names, things of that sort, so that they can't kind of be found in real life from somebody that's watching them. They don't know, that's online. Okay. The collaboration versus control. There's a big difference, right?
Can I add something about the collaboration piece? One of the advantages of doing that, while you cough and get it, is that it really encourages your kids to be doing that thinking process for themselves, which is how they build those decision-making skills. So the more that you're engaged in a conversation and asking questions and really listening to what they have to say about, you know, how do they feel? Do they ever have a sense that they've been on the screen too long? Or, you know, asking those, some of those questions can really prompt them to do some of that thinking for themselves, which is the skills that you were talking about that you really want to be building.
Yeah, it's so important. Instead of us lecturing and saying, here's all my rules, when they feel like they're part of coming up with the rules and expectations, they're much more likely to follow them, especially when they understand why they're there. And there's actually, I'm going to be, I don't have the link for you tonight, but we'll be sending out in the post emails. I actually have a course that's created for parents and teens to have conversations about this. So what it is a short video, and it's a workbook that goes along with it, so that you can have a conversation with your teen to start establishing these rules and expectations together. It's kind of a fun one. It's not about this is bad, this is good. It also brings you as a parent into the mix of you kind of talking about your own screen use. So teens really appreciate that piece of it. Okay, so one of the things that I want to talk about is the types of screen use. So I think of them in terms of 4 different categories. So we have connecting, which we've talked about, connecting with family, connecting with support groups, connecting with peers. This, I think, is one of the best things of screen time, that our kids can connect with other people. Also, consuming is one that this is probably the one that parents get the most annoyed with. This is when your kids are just sitting around watching something. It's the same as like watching TV, right? So what are the things, if you think about the consuming piece, what are things that your kids are doing online that are consuming? You can put those in the chat box there. And then we have creating. This is one that's great. It's fantastic and amazing. If we think about TikTok, for instance, if they're just consuming it, I mean, they love it. I think some of them are funny, but it's not engaging much of their brain. But a lot of kids are actually creating TikTok content. Now, there's some unhealthy pieces of them, like really just wanting to go viral, but some of the kids are creating some really fun, amazing content. So that's something that we do want to encourage, whether it's on TikTok or not. But the creation piece is really amazing, right? They can be creating on, you know, creating digital art. They can be creating audio, podcasts. There's so many things they can do online that really is enriching their life. Okay, let's see, Bonnie, can you read some of the answers coming in on the chat?
Yeah, so there's a question which I'll note for later about controlling tween gaming addiction. Um, let's see, we have YouTube watching, YouTube consuming, YouTube, Reddit, memes, yeah, social media, everybody, like YouTube is huge. My kids love YouTube.
Mhm.
Yes, there's one comment that says YouTube is a blessing and a curse.
Yes, it is.
Social media, Snapchat, yeah.
Snapchat, yeah. There's a lot of great things on YouTube, right? How to learn how to watercolor paint, how to bullet journal, how to, you know, fix your washing machine. There's so many things on there, but there's a lot of stuff we really don't want our kids to be seeing either.
Instagram, yeah, another one.
Yeah. Okay, so those are all of the, we shouldn't say all, most of those are both consuming and creating and connecting. I mean, these are all kind of in there together. It just depends on what it is. The TikTok is mostly consuming, but it can be creating. There's also learning, and learning can be coupled with creating too. But think of things that you want to know how to do, that you jump on YouTube and you look for a tutorial on it. It might be how to bake something. It might be how to, you know, clean a stain out of your carpet. I mean, who knows? The videos are endless on what we can learn on there. So again, this is a way to think about what are the categories in which your teens or your kids are using screens. And the reason this is important is because this is where you want to guide your kids. If everything they're doing is just consuming, that's less healthy than, let's say, everything they were doing is creating. That's amazing and fun. So if you talk to your kids about these 4 categories, you can begin to ask them, you know, how are you using your screen time? Because when we as parents are thinking screen time point blank, I'll give you an hour of screen time or I'll give you 5 hours of screen time, it's really not a helpful way to look at it, because we have to consider what are they doing on their screen time. Let's say, for instance, 2 hours of screen time is creating a report for school. That's going to be the learning and probably the consuming part, right? Because they're learning about something they need to present on. And so then maybe they're watching stuff, but they're learning at the same time. If our kids are connecting with friends, maybe it's friends from a previous school they went to, or maybe they're connecting with friends to talk about fun video games they're playing, then that can be a positive. If the connections are positive, the people that they're connecting with are positive, I should say. So start thinking in terms of this. When you're deciding what your rules and expectations are, you got to start by knowing how they're using their screen time, because this will really start to influence how you're talking to your kids about this. Is there anything of these that you're thinking of that you're like, yeah, I could understand if my kid's using an hour to do this, I might give them more screen time on that? What are some things that you can think of that you'd be like, yeah, get online and do that more? For some people, it would be doing math tutorials, right? Like, you know, do more of that. Okay, Bonnie brought this up before, and this is something that is really important when I'm looking at research on how screen time affects our kids. And some of this is really particular to social media, but in general too. So if our kids are spending 3 hours online and they're spending 3 hours in real time personal connection, then the research is showing there's not a super negative effect, because they're getting their personal interactions, their developmental experiences, they're getting that in their real life, in the real life connections. The real issue comes up when they're spending 5 hours online and they're spending half an hour in real-time connections. Because what happens is that online connection becomes their reality and the in-person is kind of a side note. And we want our kids to learn how to interact with people and how to experience emotions and all of those things. All right, Bonnie, what's up in the chat box so I can take a break for a second?
Yeah, okay. So there's some questions that are like specifically, what do you think about TikTok for a 10-year-old? And then can it be addictive? And maybe we can kind of address those toward the the end, unless you want to
Yeah.
tackle that for now. There's a comment about, remember these social media apps are watching us and using algorithms to keep us and children
Oh, yeah.
engaged, which is
Mhm.
absolutely true. In response to what's something beneficial that you wouldn't mind your kid being online, Trisha wrote, learn to cook. Should be, I would love my kids to do that.
That would be great. Yeah. Yeah. So let's keep track of these questions because I definitely want to get back to these and answer these. I do like this reminder that the social media apps are watching us and using algorithms to keep us and children engaged. And it's not just social media apps, it's really everything. I know that our devices listen to us and I'm not like freaked out completely by it, but it was really weird. Last night, my daughter came in and said, oh, I'm gonna go in and watch How I Met Your Mother. And she calls it something like Himmel, something like that. So immediately in my news feed on MSN, that came up like an article with that abbreviation, something about somebody, one of the actors. It was just so immediate. I mean, they are listening to us, and we just have to remember that, as you said, the whole thing is about the algorithm to keep you coming back for more.
There's a question here that says, does in-person connection mean screenless or even via screen, but to people they actually know?
Okay, so it depends on the screen interaction. If you're doing an interaction like Zoom where you can actually see the person and you can pick up on the emotional cues, that's better than just like texting and such. But it's still not the same as being in the room together. There is something to be said for energy that is passed between people. Like all of us felt it when we were in complete lockdown and then we went out, started going out into the world again. I remember the first time that I went to the grocery store when things had opened up again. And I felt really anxious just being in a grocery store with so many people around. And it wasn't me thinking about COVID even, it was me just feeling the energy of people around me. So there is a difference between being in person and being on screen. Now, having said that, as I mentioned, if you can see the person, that's at least that extra input that you can get from that person. Let's see, actually, no. Okay. All right, so we have to remember that time matters. So if our kids are out and they're doing sports and they're having in-person interactions, that's fantastic. The screen time is going to be less of a mental health issue for them. It's when that everything is on screen time and they have kind of given up on any other interactions. Okay, here's something that is really important for us to note. As we are guiding our children, we can monitor or we can spy on them. And I know a lot of parents have things on the phones, on the computers, so that they can see every interaction that their kid is having online. There are good things and bad things about this. So the biggest thing I want to say though is if you choose to have these things on your kids' devices, you need to let them know about it. Because if you are spying and they find out, it is such a breach of trust that I won't say it's irreparable damage to your relationship, but it is going to be a lot of work to get that trust back so that they want to talk to you. Now, there are times when you're in crisis as parents where you have to spy. I understand that. But in general, we want to monitor. And the other thing I want to say about this is that you don't need to monitor every single interaction that your kid is having. I was talking to a mom a few weeks ago, and she was talking about I know there's a mirroring, a thing where you can literally see every single text that your child sends. And so what she was having happen is she was getting into the girl drama that was happening. She was reading every single text. And in that case, she wasn't as available to be a support system to her daughter because she became part of it all. Because if you're listening and watching every single interaction, you begin to be in that emotional fray with the kids. If we think back to when we were young, our parents certainly did not see every interaction we had with our kids. So our parents didn't see when we were bragging about things, when we were lying to our friends about things, maybe embellishing stories. So as we're seeing every text, we begin to see what a typical adolescent does. But because we're privy to all of it, we begin to overanalyze and think, oh my gosh, my kid is just horrible and I'm teaching them better than this. They shouldn't be doing this or saying this. So we have to be careful about that over monitoring piece of it. Does anybody have any questions about this monitoring versus spying? Because this is something that comes up quite a bit. I'll wait and see if anybody has any of this. Okay, as you're thinking about those questions, let's talk about time limits. I think there's been a few questions about this, and somebody is asking right now, how much total screen time in a day should be allowed to a 12-year-old? This goes back to the 4 different pieces of screen time. So I can't answer that for every 12-year-old should have this, because every 12-year-old is different. If there's a 12-year-old who is online doing digital art, for instance, they're going to be online more because they're doing all of their digital art there. If there is another person who's video gaming, they're going to be online for different reasons. So you have to step back and look at those 4 points of screen time. How are your kids going to use those hours on the screen? And that's how you decide how much time they can have. There's no one answer for everybody. So that'll be your first step, is to think about what is your kid doing online. And then from there, and again, this should be a collaborative conversation with your kids. Talk about what are you using your screen for? And then from there, you can backtrack and say, okay, you're doing digital art. Let's see, you can have, how much time do you think you need? An hour. Okay, so that's an hour. TikTok, how much time do you think you should have? They might say 2 hours. You can be like, well, I think that's a little too much. How about we do 30 minutes? So it's that collaborative back and forth, considering what they use their screens for. Now, I will say that one thing that I highly recommend, and every family does it differently, is I like the device called Circle, where you could actually say they have 30 minutes on TikTok, they have an hour on this one. So you can actually say for each app how much time they will have. And then that takes away from you having to sit there and like note down, how much time have they been on there. And what will happen is the device will just cut them off when their time is up for that day. Okay, how about gaming? Gaming, again, I can't give you a definitive answer on how much game time they should have. Think of it in terms of balancing it with the other things they're doing in life. And I know there's a lot of gamers who love to game, and they will game for 6-8 hours nonstop, not just kids, but adults too. So the issue with that, it goes back to, if they're gaming, what else are they doing in life? What is that displacing? That's a really good way to think of screen time, is what is it displacing if your kids are online for 6 hours on the weekend? That means they're not outside at the park. That means they're not interacting with the family. It means that they're not signed up for extracurricular activities. It means they might say no to a sleepover or something because they don't want to get off their device. So think of it in terms of what is the screen displacing? And that's also a way to have a conversation with your kids. What could you be doing instead?
There's a really good,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say there's a question that came up that's relevant to that, which is that video games seem to be a topic that kids usually use in their social interaction. So it makes it very confusing about setting up the limit. So I know that's true with especially boys will, all their friends will get together and game together. So it's social, which you want to encourage. And if that's what all their friends are doing, then that could be a limit on their social time.
Right. And so again, you have to consider that, if they are getting their social time, but still, do you want them on there for 8 hours, which they would happily do, many of them, or do you want to say, okay, great, I love that you're hanging out with your friends. How about 4 hours today? Something like that. Maybe on the weekends it'll probably be more than during the week, or maybe it's only after they've done their chores that they get to hop online. So just thinking of how it fits into their entire life, instead of just thinking of it as screen time. How does it fit into everything? Finding family. We have an ongoing struggle. Do you mean like on the phones? Trisha, you're asking about the app for finding family? Okay, yeah. Depending on the age of your kids, there is nothing wrong with saying on your phone you have to have enabled like Find My iPhone or whatever it is that you're using. Again, it's your phone, first of all, but you're also the parent that is setting the expectations and rules. Now, as your kids get older, they may push back on this more. Let's say they're 16, 17, 18, then it becomes a little more tricky. But even with my own kids, when they were older and they were driving, remember at 16, it's even more important to be able to find out where they are. Now, where you're able to do this in a way that's not seen as invading their privacy is to come up with basically telling them, look, I'm not sitting there watching you on the phone, seeing where you are. This is for safety. So if you don't come home, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, that I can find where you are. So you can talk to them in terms of the why behind it. It's not that that's all you're doing all night is watching where they are. And so you can kind of set the rules and say, this is when I'm going to check on you, and go from there. Okay, I was mentioning Circle software for kids usage or time management. Yes, I was. Do you have a question about Circle, Sharath? Is that what you're asking about? Let me know if you. Oh, okay. Yeah, so new to it. So Circle is a device that I actually love it, but people use different ones. I'm not a spokesperson for them or anything. But what Circle does is it is monitoring through the Wi-Fi. So what I love is that if other people come into your home, it's also monitoring them. So your friends, your kids' friends. But it can set limits on time. It sets a bedtime for devices. So let's say your kid has an iPad and an iPhone, then you can say those things go to bed at 9 o'clock, which means that their Wi-Fi, their data doesn't work anymore. The other thing is that you can pause it. So let's say it's dinner time. You're like, okay, pause for all of our devices. So they come to the dinner table and their phone is not able to go online. So it has a lot of uses. So that's one you can check out. And there's some others. And I know that as the kids get older, they figure out ways to work around these things, but it's a really, really good way to start. Okay, let's see. Okay, go ahead, Bonnie.
I was just going to say there's some things that have popped into the Q&A that we could maybe take a look at as well. Maybe if you wanted to move on to this next topic, we can circle back.
Okay, yeah, let's circle back. So the ones that are in the chat box, Bonnie, I don't know if you can take those and put them into the Q&A so we don't lose them, or
I don't think I can do that, but I'll keep track of them.
Okay, sounds good. All right. I only have one more slide and then we'll get to all these questions. I just want to talk about the idea of taking devices away. I think it can be a good tool to use as a consequence to take devices away. However, we have to keep in mind that devices are a social connector for our kids. And you'll see if you take the phone away suddenly from especially a tween or teen, they totally panic. And one of the reasons is that if they have a conversation going, they see it as being really rude to their friends if they can't follow up on that conversation. It's as if you and I were sitting in a room talking and having a conversation, and someone all of a sudden in the middle of our conversation came, took us by the arm and took one of us out of the room. We weren't able to finish up the conversation. It was like all of a sudden the other person sitting there had no explanation as to why. That's what it feels like to our kids. So if we take devices away, there's a couple things I recommend. The first is to tell them, okay, you have 15 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on their age, before I'm going to take your phone away. And what that does is it allows them to say to their friends who they were having a texting conversation or snapping or whatever it is, to say, okay, mom and dad are taking my phone, just so you know, I'm not mad at you or something. Because kids think if they text somebody and they're left on open, as they call it, that person is mad at them somehow. So it really is messing with their social interactions. The other thing is, if you are taking away the phone for an extended period of time, let's say they've totally messed up, they haven't followed your rules and expectations, and you say, okay, no phone for 2 weeks. What I would highly recommend is that within those 2 weeks, you give them time on the phone every day. So it might be 10 minutes, something as small as that, and say, if your kids have been doing some really inappropriate things, I especially recommend you have 10 minutes. You can sit here by my side, right next to me, and get on your phone for 10 minutes. That allows them to continue to text their friends and such, so they don't have that panic, feel like they're missing out on their friendships, but yet you're kind of keeping it, that consistent consequence of 2 weeks without the phone, but here I'm going to allow you 10 minutes a day. Okay. All right, Bonnie. So that's all the slides I have. I wanted to make sure we had lots of time for Q&A. So fire away. Let me know what questions are.
Yeah, all right. So let's go back to the Q&A box. There's a couple things going in there. Samantha, actually, I think this is way back, had commented that they use the screens for information, which is true. There's someone who wrote, is it useful to try to get our kids to think about the categories of consumption, or is that a lost cause and something we should do independently?
You absolutely should have them think about it. And the way that this comes up is having that conversation of what rules and expectations are you setting in your household. So when you can sit down and go through these categories with them, that allows you a foundation for the conversation of how much screen time they're going to have. And again, I will, in our post email follow-up, I will give you access to the course that has all of this in that. And part of it is going through those categories with your kids so that it opens up that conversation.
Yeah, and it also seems like it encourages them to start thinking about that too. And yeah, all right.
Yeah, and honestly, this is useful for us as adults to think about. How are we spending our time? If we're on Facebook, right, for 2 hours a day, we need to think about what is that displacing? What could you have done in those 2 hours instead of scrolling through Facebook? So it's good for us to think too.
Right, and having those conversations out loud so that our kids can, observe us process how we're thinking about the different categories can definitely be an effective way to communicate to kids.
Yeah, one of the things in this course that I have families do is everybody starts posting on, like, on their fridge or something, how many hours a day they're spending on devices. So again, it's not just singling out one person in the family. It's like, hey, all of us are having the struggle and figuring out how to balance this. So let's just put our numbers up and let's see how we're all spending our time.
Love that. All right, so there's another question that says, what is the recommendation for monitoring? How often is it? Are there any suggestions that you have around that?
Yeah, so monitoring, there's going to be more of it as your kids are just starting to get on devices independently. When our kids are like 2, we're right there with them, right? But as they begin to jump online without us, we need to be monitoring more frequently. We'll have less of that as our kids get older, unless there's situations that come up that we need to monitor more, right? You find out your kids are doing drugs or drinking or, meeting up with people from the internet, then it's a whole new level of monitoring. But when our kids get their own phones, this is where a lot of the monitoring kind of goes awry. I don't believe that you should be monitoring every single conversation they're having. The rule that is important to set is that the devices are yours and you can get on them when you want to. However, I recommend you get on them with your kids instead of behind their back. So if you want to have a really good conversation, which I think is what monitoring can spark, you might say, okay, let's sit down and show me some of your text messages today. So you kind of go through and then you can ask questions, leave judgment to the side. You're going to see some cussing. You're going to see some things you don't like, but then you can just comment on them without the judgment, and that will get a conversation flowing. So you might say, oh my gosh, I just see that so-and-so called you a bitch, which unfortunately happens. And then, no judgment there. And they can say, yeah, that's what we call each other. I don't like it, but that sometimes they do. So you're having a conversation instead of looking for evidence or looking for things to catch them on or looking for things to punish them about. If it becomes that, your kids are going to start resenting those times where you're monitoring them.
One of the things that I've heard people use an analogy, like, when your kid is learning how to drive, you're right there in the car with them. And you don't just hand them the keys and say, here, go for it. You know, like you're there and you're just observing and making sure that they understand the rules of the road, and you're watching them make the right choices. And then you develop that confidence, you know, that they're able to do that on their own.
Yeah.
All right, so another question here, in regard to tracking on phone, how to discuss, oh yeah, there's a couple ones that have to do with co-parents. How do I discuss concerns with a co-parent or ex of tracking concerns while the other has the kids, or tracking, okay. So one has access to this content, being the primary owner of the phones, without the other having access.
Recorded tracking on phone. So I think of tracking on phone in two different categories. One is tracking where somebody is, and the other is tracking information. So Jennifer, if you could tell me which one are you referring to, or maybe you're referring to both, then I can answer that one a little bit better. I will say, because I think there was tracking. Okay, tracking location. Okay, this is interesting if you're co-parenting, or even if it's not co-parenting. Let's say like your neighbor takes care of your kids, or your grandparents take care of the kids. There's the interesting piece of, well, wait, if you're tracking, you know where I am too, right? Not just your kids. So that's a conversation that happens, of course, with the adults, not with the kid. The adults have to figure out what that looks like. So your co-parent may decide that they're not comfortable with you tracking while your child is with them. In that case, that can be a compromise. Okay, the tracking's on the phone. When they're with you, okay, the tracking is going to be turned off. And I know that's hard to do, to release that. The exception, I think, would be is if there is a concern, if there have been some issues in the past with safety, then that may be another layer that you have to really stand your ground and say, I need this tracking on. So yeah, that's and so that's tracking on that one piece. The other piece I will say about co-parenting is there's different rules in different households. So the best part, or the best way to do this, would come together as parents, and before you even give a phone or a device to your children, to figure out what you can agree on. What are the ground rules that you can agree on, whether it's screen time, using Circle or not using Circle, what kind of device they're going to have, what are the responsibilities, all of those things. Figure out as much common ground as you can. There's going to be some things that you don't agree on. Maybe your co-parent is like, I don't care how much time they spend on the screen, whereas you're a little more conservative of how many hours they can spend on there. And it's hard to release that expectation, but it's going to, in the long run, it's going to lessen the amount of fights and disagreements you have, because what will happen is your kids will be in the middle of that as you and your co-parent are, arguing over those. So figure out the bottom line, bare minimum, and then you work from there. Okay.
I think we're pretty caught up. There were some questions a little bit back about TikTok, and is it addictive? There's a question.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about TikTok. TikTok is fun, and especially if kids are creating, it's amazing. Once I started watching some of the videos, I was like, yeah, I can see why people start to watch these. I actually have on the Teen Wise podcast, I interviewed 4 girls about TikTok. So if you want to hear from teens' perspective, go find the Teen Wise podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, all this. And it's interesting to hear them talk about it. But TikTok in and of itself, just like everything online, isn't bad. The negative comes in a few things that I see. One is the amount of time that you're on it, because it does feed into the algorithm. So my brother-in-law, who's in his 30s, he was laughing because he watched a couple of videos on TikTok about monster trucks. And he's like, I didn't really think I was into it, but his feed kept showing him more and more. And all of a sudden he's watching an hour, 2 hours of monster truck videos, right? So imagine our kids, their algorithms, they're getting fed, and all of a sudden they've had 2, 3, 4 hours on TikTok, and they don't even know they've spent that much time there. So it's a real time suck. That's one problem. The other issue that I've seen on TikTok is there are a ton of middle school and high school girls that are giving diet and exercise and mental health recommendations. They have no training. Other kids are latching onto what they're saying. They're talking about restrictive eating. They're talking about things they don't know about. So we have to be mindful of what our kids are watching on TikTok. And because of the algorithm, if they watch one video on restrictive eating, guess what starts to flow into their feed. So now they haven't just seen one video on restrictive eating, they're now seeing 10, 20, 30 a day. So one thing that you can do if your kids have watched something that started a really bad feed for them, you go in and you start searching up some things that are more positive so that that begins their feed. And so they're starting to see some better things in there. Okay, what do I think about TikTok for a 10-year-old? A lot of young kids watch TikTok, but I don't think they should have unlimited access to TikTok at a young age because it is so consuming and because it is really, I don't want to say addictive, but it is something that is a time suck, right? Because they watch one and then all of a sudden they watch 20 videos. So if you allow your 10-year-old to watch TikToks, make sure it's in a very time controlled way. So they might say, hey mom, I want to watch some TikToks. Say, okay, you've got 15 minutes. Then you set the timer, and then after that, they're off of it. I've heard TikTok can become addictive in and around 10 videos viewing. Is that true? I don't understand that question completely. Are you saying that if they watch 10 videos, then it's addictive after that? If you can, Sunip, if you can just give me clarification on that. That'd be good for me to know what you're at. I gotta get back to the bottom of the feed here. Okay. Let's see. Trisha says, I have to intervene often on the mental health advice, teen to teen. Yes, absolutely. You've got to intervene on those. The good thing about it is it can start a conversation with us. You know, if our kids hear about something online, then they can talk to us about it and we can try to give them the real resources on that. One thing that I also am seeing with connection and support online teen to teen is that, and your kids may get caught up on, and this in tweens too, preteen, is that they try to be therapists for their friends. And while it's fantastic they're supporting each other, there's a lot of things that come up that they're not qualified to deal with, and they're not emotionally, developmentally ready to take on the responsibility to support their friends who are dealing with suicidal ideation or extreme depression or even, you know, questioning gender. You know, they need to have some professional support around those things. So we have to have that's a great conversation to have with your kids, that it's great to be supportive of your friends, but in these situations, make sure that you reach out to a trusted support system.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know that that is going on in those spaces and that teens look to each other. And even so, if they want to talk to another teen, like Teen Link is also a great resource because those are teenagers that talk to other teens, but they've been given training in how to do that. So
yeah, there's so many resources online. There's suicidal hotlines. By the way, for the suicidal hotlines, if you're having your kids or your kids' friends are having suicidal ideation, you can actually call those hotlines. You don't have to be the person who is experiencing that crisis. You can be the support person. So don't hesitate to call those if you have any questions about your child or your child's friends. You know, those are great hotlines.
all right. Well, so we're right at 8:02. It looks like Val has popped on. Did you have something you wanted to say? You're muted. While you're thinking about that, I wanted to let everybody know that in 2 weeks, we'll be back with our regular parent chat schedule, and it's going to be how to motivate your kids without losing your mind. And that's going to be with, is it Mary or Mari Stevens?
Mary Stevens, yeah, she is actually a middle school teacher, so it'll be great to hear her perspective.
And a social worker, apparently.
Yes. Okay, so before we hop off, I just want to answer this one last question, kind of answer it. Somebody said, when do you recommend my child gets a phone? That is such a personal thing. My kids had phones when they were like in first grade. They were what I call dumb phones. But whatever age you decide you get a phone for your child, the key takeaway is to make sure you have a conversation with them about safety. You need to have very established rules and expectations for that. I do have a course called So Your Daughter Has a Cell Phone, and that is meant for parents and kids to go through together to talk about all the pieces you need to think about together when your child is getting their first cell phone. See how to talk to kid about getting off chat line. Video game the same time you play home. Oh my gosh. Okay. So Nicole, this question has a lot in there. We don't have time to cover it, but basically the bottom line is it's a conversation, right? You've got to have a conversation with your kids, a collaborative one on expectations, rules, guidelines, and then you have to come up with a way to enforce those so that your child has a really strong structure behind their screen time use. All right, everybody, I think that's kind of it. I would say if you want to connect more with me, and for those of you who I didn't get to answer your questions, jump into the parenting lab and I can get back to you on those. Just ask your questions in there and we can talk a little bit more about it.
And we'll be giving you an email follow-up that's going to have all these resources and a recap and the recording as well. So you can rewatch it.
Right, great. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. As you're popping off, if you can just put in the chat box something that was a takeaway for you today, we always appreciate that. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.